Hey everybody, it's Daniel Elwood and Robert Johnson, and we are the Last Nighters, and we can be found on the Launchpad Media, where they're always launching new ideas in your direction. Check it out at thelaunchpadmedia.com. However, the most recent show that they have from us is, I think, from February. So I think the pandemic has maybe slowed down the process of loading our shows to their network, but eventually, this will get on there. It just won't be as timely. But this is going to be episode 120 of the show. You can find the show notes more at lastnighters.com/120. We're going to be talking about Soylent Green with our friend and previous guest, Dr. Dennis Foster. He was on with us almost a year ago, I want to say, for the day the Earth stood still. There's a very loose connection between this episode and that episode and our prior episode. This is going to be our Charlton Heston versus Richard Burton Battle Royale Highlander episode, where there can be only one greatest actor of the 1950s, 60s, or 70s, when they were both very active. Also, though, the guy who played Klaatu in the Day the Earth Stood Still was Peter in The Robe that we just did with the Anarcho-Christian last week for Easter's. And tonight is actually for the 50th anniversary of Earth Day, which happened April 13, 1970, I want to say. And I'm sure our guest, I don't want to date you, but you probably are familiar with that period of time. I was a little bit before my day. But welcome to the show, Dennis. I don't think I could have introduced you any worse than I just did.
Oh, no, that was great. And in fact, I have a yellow sticky tab right here on my computer that says that I was here May 14th to talk about the day the Earth stood still. So I guess not much has changed in my life because it hasn't moved.
Wow, so you had a reminder to do the show 11 months ago, and now we're back with you again. Well, thanks for joining us. I do remember that the episode with you before was really good. I know Robert was like, I didn't really care for the movie all that much, but the discussion was totally worth it.
Well, and here's a little side story. One of my former students, probably 6 or 7 years after she graduated, sent me an email and said, I want to thank you about the class because you opened me up to, some of these libertarian ideas. And she's become more of a libertarian, loves Tom Woods and all that kind of stuff. And so it's like, oh, that's great. And we've touched bases a couple of times. And I got an email from her. Well, I guess it was like last summer or something. She goes, I heard you on the radio. You were talking about a movie, or I heard you on the internet. You were talking about a movie, talking about the day the Earth stood still. And I thought, well, that's pretty cool.
Hey, we got another listener. That's awesome.
Yeah. We get around, Robert. Who knew? I don't know. We were probably like cashing in on your name. We were name dropping you, and people are like, oh, yeah, we'll check that one out.
Calling all trolls.
Yeah, well, thanks again for coming on, and I think this is going to be another really good discussion on a movie that probably isn't the greatest, but it's got interesting themes and a lot of stuff going on into it. And in watching this, I was like, okay, Dennis, you suggested this probably 3-4 months ago, and I'm like, holy crap! In watching it the other night, I'm like, I'm so glad he suggested this because it's like leading up to what 2022, which is when the film is based, what it might look like, if we keep on this trajectory of quarantine and like destroying the economy.
Yeah. Bell bottoms on everybody. It's going to be horrific. Everybody's going to be sweaty with neckerchiefs on, and technology is going to take a giant dump.
Great video games called Computer Space, I think it was.
Yep.
Hey, I heard that was the very first appearance of a video game in a movie. So it's like a big deal.
It was, and apparently was an actual, they were actually trying to sell that. It was before Pong, which seems incredible. But yep.
Yeah, now this came out in 73, so they probably filmed it 71, 72. Some pre-planning, pre-production kind of stuff was probably late 60s to 1970. Now, Earth Day was 1970, and this movie, well, okay, I'm jumping ahead. We usually do the Google description before this, but this movie had a very big opening montage of photos from human civilization to industrial age, to man the garbage can being terrible and destroying the environment. So this seemed to have a very leftist watermelon bent to it, to coincide with the Earth Day green movements and all of that.
Well, it was humans bad, but it was very vague as to why. It didn't explain why humans bad. It's just like, yeah, we're garbage producers or something.
Yeah,
it was like we can't fix our own problems.
Yeah, and we're destroying the ocean, so the Soylent Green can no longer be made of seaweed or kelp or whatever it was going to be, or
plankton.
Yeah,
we're going to be sleeping in stairways for some reason.
Yeah, so there's a like overpopulation thing. There's like a Malthusian thing. There's a Paul Ehrlich thing. So lots of stuff. But why don't we get into the Google description before we get too carried away here? So this came out, like we were saying, 1973, May 9th, 1973. The director is Richard Fleischer. Story by Harry Harrison. Screenplay by Stanley R. Greenberg. And a box office of $3.6 million. That's from rentals, apparently. So back when Blockbuster was around. Soylent Green, 1973, sci-fi per Google. 1 hour, 37 minutes, 7.1 IMDb, 71% Rotten Tomatoes, 66% Metacritic, and 83% of Google users like it. The description reads, in a densely overpopulated and starving New York of the future, NYPD detective Robert Thorn, played by Charlton Heston, investigates the murder of an executive at rations manufacturer Soylent Corporation. With the help of elderly academic Solomon Saul Roth, played by Edward G. Robinson in his final role, he died a few weeks later, Thorn begins to make real progress until the governor mysteriously pulls the plug. Obsessed with mystery, Thorn steps out from behind the badge and launches his own investigation into the murder. So that is the description. I'll go to Robert for your reaction and opening information before we go to our guest, Dennis.
Well, I want to say that it's kind of sad that we've got this film starring Chuck Heston and apparently Richard Burton. We got it down to those two candidates. Those are the two finalists in the top best actor of the 50s, 60s, and 70s. I don't know how that happened, but I guess this is where we're at. Yeah, this film, you said sci-fi / sci-fi? Okay.
That's what it reads. Yeah, sci-fi / sci-fi.
So I subset of sci-fi? I don't know. I love these kind of dystopian future movies, especially these low budget ones where the future is, I mean, they don't even try in this film. I mean, the most they do is put like football helmets, spray paint them silver on the cops for their riot uniforms, and then spray paint stuff like all the same color. So like the garbage trucks were like orange or something. And I guess that's kind of futuristic-y. And I mean, it's so not even trying, but I do appreciate that women become furniture in this future. This is something to look forward to.
Yeah, that was like my favorite part of the movie, and I'm gonna just show my misogyny here. But the main furniture was played by Lee Taylor Young, and for a 75-year-old lady,
I'd buy that house.
She still looks pretty good.
I'd buy that house.
All right, so Dennis, let's get your reaction to the description and what Robert had to say, and wherever you want to take us from there.
Yes, I mean, it's been a favorite of mine for a long time. It's not what you would call a well acted movie or scripted movie, or as Robert was really saying, they apparently had no money for the sets. Everybody looks like they work in a newspaper factory. You know, they all got the little hats on, and they aren't quite wearing uniforms, but they all kind of look the same. But the cast is great. You got Joseph Cotton in there, even though he's not in there for very long. As a kid, I loved Chuck Connors in an old TV show called The Rifleman. So it was great to see him in there. Edward G. Robinson, as you mentioned, this was his last movie. In fact, he died, I think it was 10 days after filming the last scene that he's actually in the film. And there were a couple of other people that were pretty well known. Brock Peters was in there. They had a couple of black actors. Brock Peters as his boss, the lieutenant, and then they had Paula Kelly as the girlfriend to Chuck Connors, which seems a little bit pushing the envelope for 1973, maybe, or maybe just responding to that particular time. I do think that it really is a period piece. 5 years later, it'd be hard to make that. It was right after Earth Day. There was, I mean, you mentioned Ehrlich. The population bomb was like well received. This is, just modern day Malthus, and this is the way things are going to go. And well, we've seen that that's not the way things are going to go. They're really going to go the way of the Matrix, right? We know that's what's really going to happen. So, so this idea that it's going to be like Soylent Green is more far fetched, I would say, in that particular regard. And just as a side note, I was in high school during the first Earth Day, and we had an assembly in the auditorium, and I was one of the participants to extol the virtues of Earth Day. I don't remember anything about what I said or what I did, but I remember being part of that.
Okay, and you have since repented for this.
Today, I throw batteries away, I throw plastic away, I throw glass away, because I've seen Mad Max, and that's what those people will need.
That's right.
Yeah, so I was
in the future. Good job, Dennis.
I was with you until the part where you were like, we're going to actually head down more like the Matrix. I would have thought the same beyond a month ago, but the last month has made me think that Soylent Green might be where we're actually headed. I really identified with what real food tasted like, when you could actually get meat and when you could actually get strawberry preserves. I mean, instead of like $500 or 500 Ds for a little jar of it. It really feels that way right now. And it's kind of amazing how these little tiny comforts that you used to just take for granted are now so much more important. My wife and I, we try to tell our kids for the longest time, like, hey, you guys have no idea how good you have it. My wife and I separately, we grew up poor. Like, we didn't have this abundance of things always available to us whenever we wanted it. And we could complain and whine that it isn't like this color or that big or that small or whatever, but now they're kind of like experiencing it. I mean, we're trying to insulate them as much as possible. We've kind of been prepper-esque in a lot of ways. So we're probably a little bit more insulated than we would people would normally be. But in a way, I want my kids to like experience this adversity so that when things do recover, they have an appreciation for things, because it is small comforts that are a big deal. I remember in the pre-show content I was telling you guys about being able to order toilet paper on Costco. It took me 3 weeks of trying. It still hasn't even arrived yet, but it felt like I won the freaking lottery, being able to actually get the order to go through. I mean, that was like a little victory. I did a little dance. You
can tell your grandkids about this hardship, Daniel, in about 30 years.
Hey, don't belittle me. No, if they continue this, I mean, things are going to get harder than it is right now. We're still on the leading edge of this, I think. Like 30 million people are going to be unemployed probably by next week. And if they continue these lockdowns for much longer, and I know it is state by state, and Trump just last night said that he's like God Emperor and can do whatever he wants, whenever he wants, no matter what. So, that threw everyone into a tizzy. But if they continue this disruption I mean, I'm not looking at like the bounce back being very quick. I mean, you still have this lost time, this lost production, this lost standard of living. You have people in India starving right now because there's no way to transport food into the cities. There's all sorts of like terrible things that are going to come to light. And whether like there's an awareness that it's connected to this coronavirus pandemic hysterics or not, it's going to be, I think, a learning moment. I hope it ends up being a time where people finally realize, like, hey, the government really screwed the pooch on this. Maybe those libertarians who are like, hey, maybe less government might be a good idea. Maybe they're onto something, but I kind of doubt it. Let's get your take on that, Robert.
Yeah, I would highly doubt that is their takeaway. These are people that ad hom us at every chance and straw man us every argument. They don't understand what libertarianism is. I'd be shocked if that was the takeaway. No matter what argument you throw at them, there's always a million, but what abouts. So I can't imagine that this is going to be the one that'll finally bring them around. Maybe for those people that are on the edge that do already see a few strong arguments on the libertarian side, this will lead them more towards us. But I don't know if I think the answer for the average statist is going to be, well, we needed more statism or better statism.
Faster and my brand of it instead
bigger,
of
faster, stronger.
The big orange guy brand
with
of it.
With the people that I want in charge. So, which is almost always the takeaway.
There was Scott Horton was on Part of the Problem with Dave Smith, and he mentioned a survey that was done for this article in the Atlantic, and there were like 8 unconstitutional measures, or they were very, very borderline constitutional based on current day interpretations of what's constitutional. So they were definitely unconstitutional. But a majority of people said yes, they support every single one of them. Some of them were seizing businesses entirely. Some of them were like suspending habeas corpus and all sorts of things. I mean, a lot of these things have already actually happened. They're happening now. And it just went to show me, and it was probably reflected in our previous episode toward the end when I had a rant about disillusionment and how we're way more outnumbered than I had ever thought. It was because of those numbers. It was like 90% of the people were supporting more government intervention. We are still more vastly outnumbered than I ever thought.
Well, you do have to take those numbers with a little grain of salt, though, because you're not hearing the questions that they were being asked. Like the chances, the outcome of a poll can vastly hinge on how you ask that question.
Yeah.
I can't think of a good answer or sample right now, but you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
I think you could say, well, if the question is, do you think the government should have more power and control in order to eliminate this kind of problem?
Yeah, people will be like, yeah.
You'll say, yeah, because they want to solve the problem. It's like, if the government will solve the problem, then I'm for more government to solve the problem.
Right.
Yeah, they're baking into the cake to solve the problem.
Yes. In fact, I've had this argument before with regard to some issues locally, and it's like, well, change the question to, if the free market could do a better job of dealing with the coronavirus, should we allow for more free market activity? Well, then you probably still get 90% say yes, because they want that same outcome.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I want to say there was an episode, it might have been Free Man Beyond the Wall, where there was a pollster, somebody who actually writes these polls for a living, or the questions for a living. And he was like, yeah, I can get you whatever answer you want. I just phrase the question a different way. I can get this polls to say whatever you want it to say. You just pay me enough money and I'll do it. So
I don't know if it was Freeman. I think I saw, it might've been the same. You might've seen the same thing, but I think it was like a Democratic operative at the time who was talking about, he was like a pollster for, I don't know, the DNC or somebody, but yeah, I know what you're talking about, Daniel.
Yeah. And it makes sense. I mean, I've ranted ad nauseum about statistics and giving the state some kind of semblance of somewhere to direct resources. Like the census is a great example, and they promote it as such. They're like, oh yeah, answer these questions and we'll make sure that your state and your county and your area gets enough resources for all of this federal money that's going to come your way. And I'm like, no, I don't want you guys to know shit. I don't want you to think you know what you're doing, because you don't. And every 10 years, you think every 10 years is really going to give you a significant amount of data to make such decisions? I mean, it's ridiculous.
Yeah.
I've also been getting threatening letters from them saying that it's required by law, and if I don't reply, then apparently they can come and throw me in jail.
Yeah, I've gotten that letter. Yeah.
I mean, doesn't that mean they already know I'm here?
Yeah. You're looking for him. You found him, Yes. I incriminate myself every year to the IRS. I divulge my books to, you guys know everything. So plus, hey boys at the NSA, you guys are listening right now. Welcome. Thank you for being part of our shadow listenership. You already know all this stuff. But yeah. And it's weird because they make it sound like it's, well, because it's authorized by the Constitution or whatever. And as I'm a Lysander Spooner man on this, it has no legitimate bearing or no moral bearing on me. But because it happens to be listed in there, they say, well, you're required to because you were born or something. I don't even know. But we should be talking about this movie. I'm sorry. I've been ranting. I feel like I've been ranting for like 20 minutes. Barely talking about this movie.
You're all fired up, man. The world is going to hell in a handbasket and you're all excited about it. I can see. You're a collapsitarian.
Oh, you know, I
got to say one thing. After I got done with my hike, and all the coronavirus stuff was happening, first thing I did was watch World War Z so I could feel better.
It's not that bad.
We're
not all sleeping on staircases yet, so I think there's time. If we get enough people out there, you let them listen.
In fact, one of the questions I have about this movie is that it seems quite unsustainable. I mean, we are looking at a snapshot view of this little world, but it seems to me that what's going to happen is everybody is going to die. I mean, it's not a sustainable, system the way they have it presented in the movie.
Yeah, if you're getting all your protein from dead people, is it enough to feed everybody?
And that's only once a week.
Yeah.
Yeah, wouldn't that be like a perpetual motion machine if you could get something like that to work, like, not in like a small scale, but like in a social systems kind of way? Like you're going to use up the energy of expired people or people who've been scooped up by the snow plows and shoved into the trash compactor.
There's definitely a lot of usable energy lost in all of that manufacturing process that you're not being put back into the system. So yeah, I think you're going to lose out eventually.
Yeah. Now, were they just using people who were like caught in protest and also those who went to the, Dr. Kevorkian mellow music and panoramic cinema screen deathbed scene stuff to like turn those people into food?
I think so. I don't think it was anybody else, was it? I mean, he was at the end, he was kind of afraid that people would be being grown for the express purpose of being turned into Soylent Green. But at the moment, it's just people are dying eventually. And so you might as well eat them.
Or protesting.
Well, and I didn't necessarily think that the protesters were going to be killed. I mean, the one guy got killed, of course, but it's like, well, they scoop them up, they take them away, and presumably they let them loose again.
Yeah. So what did you guys think of the ultimate point of the film? Like, is it a huge moral outrage? It's definitely some fraud, but it's not like they're going out and murdering people. And then they're also providing this service.
And people like Soylent Green.
People like it. They love it. So,
well, it's they're
not clamoring to know what's in it, apparently.
It's sort of like the situation with Snowpiercer, where they're providing these protein blocks that are made out of this endless supply of cockroaches that are apparently on this train. But they are billing this as something else. So these protein blocks, it's like, well, it technically is a protein block. I mean, it just is bug protein. This, they're saying, is this plankton stuff. And it took me a while to kind of figure this out, but apparently the books are such a rare commodity, and because they weren't cataloged, they were sort of off what's the word? They were not like officially recognized. And these were oceanographic studies that were saying like, hey, the harvesting of plankton is no longer going to be sustainable. So we're going to need to find another source for creating this food protein. And so then the governor, Santini, found, I guess, another way. I mean, was this all just within this New York state and city kind of as their solution to Mad Max? Or was, because they don't mention, I mean, they sort of mention the outside world. They say, well, there are farms out there, but they're like heavily guarded because Furniture Girl was like, hey, run away with me. Let's leave the city. The city is like terrible. Let's go somewhere outside of the city and like live happily. And he's like, nah, like, I don't want to go. It's all overly defended. We can't leave anyway. But I felt like Heston, because he grew up in the city and had never known anything outside the city. Like Saul makes mention of, he's never known what good food, what real food was like. So we're to believe that Heston, who's probably in his 40s in this movie, is a much younger guy, and he's never seen anything outside. So he just has this, like, his world is the city, and anything outside of that is sort of unimaginable. But it could have been that, outside of this area, it was actually pleasant. Who knows?
Yeah.
Well, he
there's
did
all kinds
imply
of
that. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
He did imply that you could go to another city, but he said there wasn't any point to it. And I think it was really the whole world. I don't know if it was the whole world. Somebody says that Soylent controls half the world's food supply. So I don't know if that means that it's like the whole world is kind of organized as a single kind of government, or if at least most of the food comes from them, and then there's some other sources of food. I mean, there must be sources of fresh food, right? Because we see that in a couple of scenes. So it seems to me like to get to your question about earlier, it seemed to me Soylent Green was pervasive around the world. It wasn't just here in New York City.
Right. There were other Soylents, right? Soylent Orange and Soylent Yellow, and they
yellow and red.
Yeah, and they were like allegedly different foods.
They were vegetable. They were advertised as vegetable protein,
yeah.
which would be what you do on the farms, right? You're growing. In fact, in the book, Soylent stood for soybeans and lentils.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Now, because, well, so they were doing the Soylent Green, but only on Tuesdays, and they were doing the other foods. Are we to believe that only Soylent Green was humans and the other things were what they said they were, or something other than human?
That would be my conclusion. Yeah.
Yeah. Otherwise, the film doesn't answer the question, which would be kind of annoying.
Like Soylent Green is humans and Soylent Yellow is puppy dogs.
Yeah.
I guess that would be kind of a shocker.
Well, so what do you guys think of the cops situation? So Chuck Heston is this kind of almost homeless guy who happens to be a cop, who has Saul, who is a book, to help him. And I thought that meant like bookie, but maybe upon further reflection, it meant like a researcher or somebody who could find records for you to help with investigations. But it almost felt like they were operating almost on the level of private investigators with a sort of structure of a reporting structure kind of behind the scenes. It felt really weird,
Well, he certainly was. He was like a substitute for a computer today, right? I mean, they didn't have computers really back then. So you're right. This guy is the researcher. Every cop has to have his own researcher, otherwise you can't find out information. But it just the way in which the corruption was systemic. It didn't matter if it was Heston or the guy from the waste disposal or the lieutenant or somebody else. It's like everybody sort of tolerates this corruption in order to survive.
Yeah, even the cleanup guys who came to the apartment to pick up the dead guy, Heston had to pay them off, like their little piece of the action. I'm not sure why that exactly was. I mean, was he paying them a tip to actually do their job, or
to look the other way when he was robbing the place blind?
I think it was like a body fee. It's like, well, we could have just done something else with the body, but it's going to go to waste disposal, and then we're going to get refunded, or we're going to get paid for that, and then they're going to get their cut of that payment.
Okay, all right. So there's sort of like dealing in. You get a piece of this because we're going to get a little bit of money for it. So thanks for giving us the call to like pick it up. So it's like a like in Seinfeld when Newman and Kramer took the mail truck of bottles to Michigan to get the 10-cent refund. They ended up spending more in gas.
Well, and also there was a scene where people were lined up for death benefits. And so, I mean, I presume there's a death benefit for everybody. So that was like $270. And so that means, okay, this guy has no next of kin or anybody to claim the death benefit. So that presumes that these guys can claim it, and then they can split it up among themselves.
Yeah, so that brings me back to like this just overall situation there. They had a UBI, they had death benefits, they had 20 million people out of work. It was hard to get groceries, get meat, get real eggs, and you needed a permit to be out on the street. I mean, it's literally today, at least in places like New York and Seattle.
Yeah, even the guys in the supermarkets are like behind a cage. Now we have them behind plexiglass screens, but close enough.
Yeah, and I had thought that, you know, when they showed the meat, that it was going to be revealed later that that was not cow meat. But I don't think that was ever brought up.
No, it was supposed to show how amazing, how far they had fallen, that if one slice of beef was that prized.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, yeah. So I sort of like the reputation of this movie preceded it. So in watching it, I'm like, oh shit, that's human meat. Cannibal,
It is kind of funny about that. You don't, I mean, the whole movie, everybody that knows it, you know, knows the whole Soylent Green is people, but that isn't really revealed explicitly until like the last 5 minutes.
Yeah.
It just mostly plays out as kind of a crime drama in a dystopian world.
Yeah, I mean, in a way, I kind of liked, like, if you don't know going into it, because they do conceal what it is. Like Saul is whispering, and then the audible, you know, the sound goes out, drops out, but we know Heston hears it. So, and then there was another moment where I think they told Saul, the elders, and he gets this like horrified look. It's like, oh, I can't believe they would do that. But you as an audience don't know yet. So I guess they're kind of playing up to that big payoff at the end, which is like a top 100 line of film history. It's people. So
they also had the priest, right? Because the priest is saying, you know, that, you know, he's all out of it. And he says it's because he learned the truth. But then that's all we hear. That's all we know about that.
Yeah, and then he gets shot. Now I wonder, he must have had other things going on, right? Like he wasn't just traumatized from this, or was
I think he was just traumatized from that, because everything else is just normal, standard, you know, occurrence. It seems like.
Yeah, this movie really is very similar to Snowpiercer. I don't know if you've seen that movie, Dennis, but we just did it recently. And
I've seen it twice, and I didn't like it either time. But
okay, well,
but I look forward to hearing your take.
Well, in that movie, like the thing that keeps everybody alive is child labor. And in this movie, the thing that keeps everybody alive is eating other dead bodies. But each time it's revealed in this horrific, huge, immoral thing. And I'm just curious if it really is, because it's an innovation that is keeping everybody alive. So, I mean, clearly it's immoral in that it's fraud, but how mad can everybody be at the end of the day? It's like, well, we've been eating people for the past couple months, and I really like it, and it's keeping my children alive. So, I don't know. I just don't see the big outrage.
Well, in fact, I put down some notes here too about that. It's like, well, we don't really know how it's going to end. The idea is that the information's supposed to get back to this exchange, whatever it was called, the exchange, and that they were going to inform some quote unquote Council of Nations, which we don't know what that means either. And the presumption is that somehow they'd put a stop to it. I mean, that has to be the conclusion you draw, that they're trying to find out because they want to put a stop to it. But if they put a stop to it, there isn't enough food to feed everybody. So a lot of people are going to have to die anyway. And so, you know, to your point there, it's more than a little problematic trying to figure out how this really gets resolved after the movie is over.
Yeah, that's sort of, I think what you're alluding to, Robert, is Ed Harris's character. He's actually creating a situation where the people in the back of the car, the final car on the train, can actually live, can actually survive, and not resort to cannibalism. And so they should, in a weird way, be appreciative of being alive. I mean, sure, he does other nefarious and terrible things to them, so he's not like this saint or anything. But had he not stepped in and provided what he provided, they would all be dead. Similarly, in this, because the plankton is no longer abundant, there is no other source for this food. So had this not occurred, then people would have died as a result of starvation. So, I mean, in a way, yeah, they weren't out forthright with what it is they're eating, but at the same time, the alternative was what?
Well, ultimately, the best alternative is to open it up to the market to solve the problem. But apparently, this is some sort of totalitarian communist regime where you have bread lines and rations and that sort of thing. So, but yeah, in this world that is presented, what is the alternative? A whole bunch of people dying. So, because you need protein to live.
Yeah.
You need protein is required for cells to reproduce, and you got to keep doing that. So,
and if more people died, then you'd have even more resources just going to waste. And what's the bigger waste, like spoiling a resource or not using it at all?
In fact, I was one of the things I was wondering about is there clearly are some rich people because we see Joseph Cotton, and there's some people that do pretty well because we see some of them in the specialized services, like Chuck Connors being the bodyguard, and even the manager of the apartment building. And I was thinking, well, why aren't they just outright killing people? Because it's a drain on resources, and it's got to be keeping their standard of living down. And all these people sleeping on the street aren't contributing to their standard of living at all.
I was going to say, you could start with all the staircase people.
Yes. There's a guy at the top of the staircase with like an AK-47 or something, guarding the apartments.
Wow.
Yeah, I actually kind of like that part. Like they're doing their own, internal like building security, That part was good.
Yeah. Made sense.
But yeah, you're right. Like it seemed like nobody was very productive at all. I think there were 40 million people in New York City and 20 million were out of work. So it was a very much a class warfare kind of vibe to this as well. People connected to the governor and people connected to the corporation were pretty well off, and they were hiding this like evil secret. And it seemed like a few people were kind of in on it. What was his name? Charles, the doorman or the security guy at the building. He was going around hitting women and getting away with it. Chuck Heston was hitting a woman and getting away with it. It seemed like in the 70s, I guess that was more,
you can hit furniture, Daniel. It's not a big deal. I can punch a couch right now, and no one's going to freak out about it.
My cousin punched a couch. He broke his hand.
Well, that will happen, but he didn't get in trouble for it. That's my point.
No. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Well, okay. So we've got 20 million unemployed right now, right? Here in the United States, currently speaking. And that's due to government dictate, right? That's what's stopping the market from functioning properly. So there's probably something in this film that's stopping these people from functioning, the market from functioning properly. Because you can't just have 20 people just laying around doing nothing, wanting to do nothing. Unless it's like you said, it's some sort of UBI. But even the UBI is horrific. It's like, what, you still have to sleep on a staircase somewhere or the floor of a church? It's not like you're even getting your $1,000 a month, or if you're getting your $1,000 a month, it's not paying for anything.
Yeah, and there were all these lines to get rations, and then they ran out and had the riot, right? Because that one woman came out and was like, I only got like 1.5 pounds or 1.5 kilos of whatever was on offer, and that was the last of it. And then the police shut it down, and then everyone freaked out. I mean, it's like Bernie's paradise right there.
It seemed to me the only thing we saw produced was food. It was the Soylent stuff and then we saw the fresh food, but we actually didn't see anything else that represented current production. We saw the video game, but the video game was portrayed as being an antique that somehow he had picked up. So after I was kind of thinking about it, it's like, yeah, the only thing they're producing is food. And that's how they can sort of make the system work where everybody's unemployed or so many people are unemployed, because there isn't anything else for them to buy, right? If you think about Charlton Heston's apartment, there was nothing in there that was new. Everything was older stuff that was, being kept useful by whatever activities he and Edward G. Robinson were able to do.
Yeah, so you just had service people. You had the cops who were providing a service. You had the grocer. You had the garbage men, but not a whole lot of other jobs to be had. Well, you had the pastor guy, I guess. But
yeah, so they were living on older technology, sort of like Cuba. They'd have cars from the 50s and keep them running for like 50 years, 60 years.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So there was another thing I was going to mention. Oh, so I didn't get the plot as far as not the plot of the movie, but like the dastardly plot to off this Simonson guy. So he had a bodyguard who was in on it. Why didn't the bodyguard just whack him? Why did they have to hire this other guy who got into this broken vehicle to get hired to get a tire iron to like then break into the building, and then the guy the bodyguard conveniently leaves with the furniture to go to the grocery shopping so that this hired assassin can go in and whack Simonson? Like, why go through all the trouble? If Santini, the governor's like wants this done, why doesn't he just tell the bodyguard to do it? Or why don't they just pick up Simonson, using the police force or whatever, like, if they're in a totalitarian state, why can't he just totalitarianly take care of this rather than have this facade of a break-in and a robbery?
I guess there's still some ideas of liberty and justice still in place, I guess it's just showing that the society hasn't deteriorated to that point yet, I guess. It sure seems like there's plenty of authoritarianism, totalitarianism going on to justify what you're talking about. I don't know.
I would think they would just have disappeared him or suicided him, like make him have a heart attack or whatever. Or just...
There's got to be a crime to investigate, Daniel. Jeez, what else is Chuck Heston going to do for an hour and a half?
Yeah, I think that's probably just the reason that you're right. There was a lot of different ways they could have done that where presumably it wouldn't have been an issue, but then you don't have a movie.
Yeah, and I guess the hit called out on Chuck Heston there, which was kind of laughably carried out. I don't know. It's like all the action scenes were the action was very, very good. And is that just a product of cinema at the time? I mean, is it all
low budget and bad? Just bad lighting, bad cinematography, bad action, bad choreography. Just bad. Everything bad. Daniel.
I would say it was good for its time. At the time, that's the way movies were made.
We've gotten so much better. Not to say that all movies are good now, but just in the terms of the way they look, the way they're presented.
I think part of it is the filming. I remember watching something once where somebody it may have been about Star Trek, about how, back in the original series, when you had to punch somebody, you had to give these big roundhouse punches, because then it looks good on the video. Whereas today you don't see that because it doesn't really look good at all.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, that wild, stylized, just wacky fighting is gone, and it's a thing of the past, and it's a good thing because it's ridiculous and no one would actually do it.
Yeah,
I mean, maybe you see people do it in like YouTube videos or fighting on the street videos or something, but it's people that don't know how to fight.
You talking about bum fights, Robert?
Just YouTube, Daniel, internet.com. You've seen it.
Okay, yeah. So they could have had a whole social media empire with all these homeless people in this movie, like doing stuff.
Yeah, they could have. Those people would have done all kinds of crazy shit for a few bucks.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like maybe I'm being insensitive. So I'm curious. I'll direct this to you, Dennis. Why does this have such a cultural phenomena around it? Like everyone knows what this movie is, even though it's not a very good movie. Like what's the thing that's making it stick around, and what at the time when it came out was it attempting to do culturally? I mean, it seems like it's pushing environmentalist agenda and the class warfare kind of thing, but why did it stick around so much?
Well, I think I mean, really the foundation is the Malthusian nightmare, the overpopulation. And I think at that time, we were kind of ripe for it. In fact, I was hoping to take a closer look at the book, but just haven't had the time to go back and review a lot of it. But the author's opening comment is that it was all informed by Malthus, that it was all about, the population grows at geometric rates, but the food supply grows at arithmetic rate. And so we're going to end up with this problem of overpopulation and not enough food to feed people. And, that was the foundation of his story and the foundation of this movie. And we certainly have seen that fear expressed in other ways. We mentioned Ehrlich, and the population bomb was all about overpopulation. The Chinese and their one-child policy for whatever it was, 20 years or something, was related to that as well. And today, I would say, I think we've passed that. There still are the fringe, I would say, that still go on after population as being a problem. But I think most people kind of dismiss that now. But that's because 50, 60 years ago, people were talking about it then, and it wasn't true then, and it's still not true now. So I would say it's the Malthusian thing that really captured people's attention, and to some extent still is, kind of interesting to think about. I was trying to think about whether there were any other movies that were quite like that, where the premise was overpopulation, and I wasn't really coming up with much. I mean, we see some dystopian futures. I was thinking about Babylon AD, if that shows up on your list of things to do sometime. And it's like, okay, we see that, but it's not like an overpopulation problem. It's something else. It's a war. It's a pestilence or whatever's going on. But this one is kind of unique in that regard.
Dennis, are you familiar with the Marvel movies?
Well, when what's his name, Thanos killed half of the people and said, well, that was the argument.
That's the argument.
Yes.
That's absolutely
and
the
I
argument.
saw that. I haven't seen all of the movies, but I saw those last couple, and I said, oh, there's Malthus again, and and maybe he's right about it, maybe he's not, but that was kind of the interesting justification, and clearly portrayed as the bad guy, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, no, he's portrayed as a madman for sure, for believing in Malthus, which is refreshing. Although a lot of people online thought, Thanos was right. There was like a hashtag movement, Thanos was right, which is
well, I have people right now saying that this shutdown is great for the earth, like, oh, there's no pollution in India, so now you can see the Himalayas again. And this would be great, having all these people like not be industrial and whatnot. But
let's just all go back to the land, Daniel. It worked out in Cambodia. I don't know what the problem is.
All go agrarian, But yeah, and Logan's Run was another movie that was a population one. Like anyone over
population control.
Over 25, right?
Was it 25 or 30? I want to say maybe it was 30.
It's well behind, at least.
Anyway, it's in the past for me, so I don't know, whatever it is.
Yeah, we're on borrowed time if we're in Logan's Run here.
No, we all renewed in Carousel. That's what happened.
Well, maybe it's worth just revisiting exactly why Malthus is retarded. Malthus didn't take into, like, these lefties always take the world as it is, like a snapshot moment. They never like understand things change over time, and technology gets better and innovation happens. And every human being that is somehow a problem for population is also an economic actor that drives down prices, is also an innovator that can create products that will improve everybody's lives and create more food out of less space and resources. So it doesn't take into account any of that. And to just say that every next person is an increasing problem is just asinine. I mean, how can you look at the world today and then look at the world 100 years ago and say that we're in a worse situation? We're demonstrably vastly wealthier. The standard of living is just ridiculously higher compared to 100 years ago. And that's due to innovation and wealth creation.
There's a recent
voluntary change through government action, Daniel.
Yes, there is a recent dip.
Yeah, and that bolsters my argument for getting the government out of the market. Daniel,
I concur.
You government apologist.
Doctor, do you concur?
There's another aspect to what Robert's saying too, and that is, I think even in 1973, not enough data had been collected to show the correlation between wealth and population, that and birth rates, that as we've gotten wealthier, the birth rate's gone down. And so when one looks at that, you also kind of throw Malthus out the window and say, well, no, the richer we are. I mean, his premise is turned upside down in this movie. His premise is that if our standard of living goes up above whatever is barely needed to sustain ourselves, then we have more kids. And then having more kids puts a drain on resources, and it lowers our standard of living back down to the bare minimum. And then if our standard of living goes up again, if we sort of follow Robert's argument about the economic progress, it goes up again, it's going to be self-defeating, because then we're going to have more kids again, and then that's going to pull us back down. But in the movie, that's not what's driving this. In the movie, you just have this huge population. According to Malthus, it's like, well, their population is going to be stable at whatever the bare subsistence is, and yet, as I look at the movie, they're not going to survive for very long, at that level.
Yeah, with half the population not doing a damn thing to produce anything. Yeah. It's like a Snowpiercer situation where most of the people are in the back just sitting around doing nothing but eating all day. Maybe you got this source of infinite cockroaches somewhere in the universe, in the Soylent Green universe. I don't know. They can take advantage of that.
All right. Well, this has been a good discussion so far, and unfortunately, we're almost at our time. So, are there any final notes that anyone wants to bring up before we do final summary and review, and then potentially some Kathleen Turner Overdrive available for our Patreon supporters at lastnighters.com/Patreon?
Well, it's Dennis is muted. He looks like he's trying to talk.
Yes, sorry. There were a couple things I wanted to just throw out there. Again, it's one of the last minute things. One is that there's a Marxist element to this too that's not really developed in the movie, but Soylent controls half the world's food supply, apparently controls a lot more than just the food supply. And how did they get to be big? We know that they bought out Simonson's company, and it just seemed like a Marxist story for the evolution of economies into giant monopolies, and they get bigger and bigger and bigger. It's a little nuanced, but it's in the movie. And then, of course, the other thing that we didn't really talk about at all is just the assisted suicide. The thing with Edward G. Robinson going into the place at the end. For us, it's all because he's horrified to learn about the Soylent Green, but it's another interesting topic, of course, for discussion. Should there be assisted suicide? Should it be state controlled? There's a lot of things going on there.
Yeah, with the incentive structure, it'd be a little bit. I mean, I'm all for voluntarily ending your own life. You have social ownership. You can decide what to do with your body, but there definitely are some perverse incentives if this company is selling your carcass to Soylent, or selling it back to the people. Well, I don't even know how this pay structure is happening. I don't know where the money is going if they're just giving the food away in rations. I don't know. It's all unexplained, but
yeah, it seemed weird because it was like a super nice place and a super nice way to go. You would think that they would charge you money, so you'd have to save up money to be able to do something like that.
Go to the Disneyland of suicides.
Yeah, it really did seem like that. And like part of the ceremony was seeing the earth as it was before man the garbage can just defiled it. You could see nature and animals and listen to classical music and I don't know, drink whatever Kool-Aid he drank. Because they had him drink like this red drink, and then that was what did it, right? Like it just took a little bit of time from there. So
sounds right.
Jim Jonesy.
Yeah, that was my impression.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, very, very good discussion, and thank you for bringing up the point, Dennis. They also seem to miss out that there's just like that one corporation that bought another, and then there's one other corporation, but it all seems to be kind of tied to the government, and it's not clear who influences who. Like, is Santini in charge, or is the Soylent Corporation kind of calling the shots? Because Simonson, who was on the board, he knew that he was going to be taken out. Like, he kind of accepted his fate because he was, I don't know, upset about it, depressed about it, and he knew he would talk or whatever, so he kind of understood why they were doing it. But it wasn't clear like who was really calling the shots in this totalitarian hellscape of New York City 2022.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah. But Santini and Cuomo seem kind of similar in some ways. Throw that out there. But
and
Robert,
he was actually running for office. We saw some campaign posters. We didn't see anybody else's campaign posters, so I don't know if it was sort of a Saddam Hussein kind of election. But
99% of the vote, baby. Super popular, right?
Man of the people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, yay democracy. All right, well, let's get into a final summary and review before we get into some Kathleen Turner Overdrive. So I'll start with you, Robert. Score 1 to 10. Please.
All right. Well, it speaks to the filmmaker's opinion of mankind that they don't even bother to explain the reason why the world goes to hell. They just kind of show these pictures in a sequence and like just leaving it to the audience's understanding that, well, yeah, I mean, that's the natural progression. That's what's going to happen. You don't even have to explain it. People are just like, oh, yeah, I'm totally on board with this happening. But I think if you have, I think our perspective, I mean, I could see it going this bad, but only through force and coercion. I don't think any kind of voluntary world would end up like this, because you have all kinds of needs that aren't being met by the market. You've got just all these people. I mean, housing is one of them. Goods and services are non-existent. I mean, you just go down the list of pretty much everything. All they had was a little bit of food and these crappy old, it's like, yeah, Havana under the embargo. So it's clearly the market is not operating. There's all kinds of perverse incentives and force and coercion happening that the movie, I think, just takes for granted. I don't think they bother to try and explain that, or that is the cause. They just take it as man is bad, man has destroyed the world, and there's this too many people, and they're all causing too many problems. So, it doesn't really work for me. I would have liked a better explanation as to why this world exists. But as a rule, I do enjoy dystopian sci-fi movies, just for the silliness and the silly ideas that people have about the future. It really shows that we just can't predict the future. Nobody can. Nobody has all the information to predict basically what the market's going to do next year, let alone 20, 30, 40, 50 years from now. So it shows hopefully it brings people more humility in their totalitarian instincts to tell other people what to do. But for this film, it's a movie. It is definitely a movie, and Chuck Heston, I can say, was definitely in it. and there was a woman that was in his furniture that he just kind of walked in, and he's like, well, we're having sex now, so just lay down. I don't think that that's how that works, Chuck Heston. Maybe in your world that's normal. I don't know. But I don't know. The story didn't really grip me too much. It was kind of weird. The acting was, Chuck Heston-ish. There's not to say that there isn't good actors in the film. I just don't think that they were really written particularly well. The furniture lady I thought was pretty good. I could definitely she felt like a real human being for the most part, in this kind of weird society. But I don't know. The reveal wasn't huge in my mind. I mean, obviously, I'm seeing it for the first time, but I've already known what the reveal is. So I don't know if it really plays. I don't know what it's like to have watched it the first time in 1973. So for me, watching this now, I'd say this is like a 5. It's fun in kind of a schlocky way, but it's not like a great example of the genre, I would say.
All right, Robert, thank you for that. And did you find in watching it that you were seeing some parallels to like present day, just recent present day?
Well, to take it to the comedic extreme, but yeah, I mean, there's some stuff I know that you were talking about. I would agree. I don't think we're all sleeping in staircases and wearing bell bottoms just yet, but maybe that could get to that point.
It's making a comeback, it seems like.
I mean, it is getting to be summertime, so I will be sweatier, and neckerchiefs are pretty hot, stylish kind of look. So I don't know. Well, come back.
You got to be wearing a mouth cover in these days, in certain areas.
Yep, that's true.
Some guy in Philly got like ripped off of a bus because he wasn't wearing something.
Yeah, so
really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Manhandled by like 10 cops. Pretty cool, huh?
Did they give him COVID? I don't know.
Well, I love how when the cops bust somebody for breathing, they'll not be wearing protective measures, and they won't be recognizing the safe space or whatever. They just violate it. But
they're the special people.
Rules
for special class.
Rules and haircuts.
For thee,
haircuts for me.
That's right.
All right. Well, Dennis, let's get your summary and your score, please.
Well, I just to go back, I mean, this is a great example of the Malthusian nightmare. I think what's, to me, kind of interesting, if you can think your way through it, obviously this doesn't make much sense. The movie is a low budget movie from many, many years ago. But I think that parts of it, are really quite compelling. The opening of the opening credits, where they've got the kind of old timey music and the old photographs, and then that evolves into more frantic music and more pictures of what's going on now, where things are crowded. That they do a pretty good job of painting that dystopian future. I like the even at the end credits, they use all the music from the chamber where they commit suicide. They have all the bright colors, and they got that more lighter classical music going on, which I think makes for a nice bookend in terms of the filming itself. Some of the scenes are really great. The scene of Edward G. Robinson and Charlton Heston eating the real food, that goes on and on and on, maybe a little long, but it really immerses us in this notion of what it's like to live in this world that's so deprived of what we take for granted in terms of our standard of living. So I really like that. I like dystopian movies, even though I think they're all wrong, because they discount the market and they make this seem like some kind of a market problem, and that's a flaw. But for some reason, I'm still attracted to them because I find them fascinating in terms of how they paint these terrible pictures of what the future is going to look like. In terms of like a score, this has been one of my favorite movies. I have a copy of it. I watch it every so often, and so I'm going to go with the sort of ranking of the fact that this is what I think it's like the 71st or 72nd most popular or well-known line from any movie in America, and I'm going to give it a 7.1.
All right. Well, thank you very much for that, and I'll agree with you that it does seem like all the dystopian movies, as entertaining as they often are, there's always some flaw where, like, okay, they have to like ignore this this economic law or this fact of reality to make their problem actually exist, which is kind of bizarre because, like, if you read the news or watch the news these days, it seems like we're always a hair's breadth from like total disaster all the time. So you'd think that, like, you wouldn't need to come up with a story where you have to assume away some flaw to actually make it function, to actually have dystopia kind of exist. So yeah, it's just kind of a weird thing to realize, because in a way we are sort of in a dystopia, even though, Robert, you said that we're living far better than human history has ever lived. And that's a point, hearkening back to what I was telling our kids growing, or, that we're telling them how great they have it. But there's also the biggest surveillance state ever. There's the biggest governments ever. There's the most destruction, the most war, all of these things. And they're more like covert wars. They're off book wars. There's not officially wars, but there's people being killed all over the world due to, military interventions and other government interventions. So I don't know. It's like, in a way, we are living both very, very well, but also in a somewhat dystopian, Brave New World, kind of like where we're sort of acquiescing to the violence. Like we're kind of okay with it. We call it something else. So it's a little bit of Huxley. It's a little bit of Orwell, and it's a little bit of Rand, Ayn Rand, with the 20th Century Motors and the Atlas Shrugged government interveners in things. So anyway, it just feels like we're kind of like in this mashup of all this dystopian stuff, but there's always a flaw in their logic. Anyway, back to this movie. I enjoyed this. And yes, Chuck Heston, I think it comes back to his, like, probably more of a stage trained actor. It just seems like the way of how filming was done back then. And I mean, by the 70s, it probably had changed a bit, but as we saw in The Robe, it's very much like you're trying to project this performance out so that the back rows can see and understand what's going on. It's still kind of like old dog, new tricks kind of thing, like they're still doing that even in the 70s, even though there's a lot of close-up shots and things like that. So I think that's just part of what Chuck Heston was doing. He was a big star back then. I think that the movie was actually pretty good once I kind of understood what was going on, and the reputation did precede it. So the ending was sort of spoiled for me, but it also led me to think things were what they weren't in watching it. Like, I thought the meat was human meat, but that might have made it more interesting. Like, make it a Silence of the Lambs / Jeffrey Dahmer caper instead of some fraud on what the food is actually made out of. But still a good movie. Glad I watched it. I can see why it has sort of become indelible in cultural history. And it was a nice piece of propaganda, as far as like that opening scene, like Dennis, you were saying. That was actually pretty powerful, seeing the images of human civilization growing ever more crowded and polluting as they advanced through the ages. So it did paint a pretty powerful image leading it in. I guess you could call that poisoning the well almost in a certain way, where you're like preconditioning like your audience for what's to come. But it was a good movie. So I'm going to go with a 6.5 on this one. So do either of you guys have any response to anything before we talk about what we're going to be doing next week?
I have one more thing I was going to add that I was forgetting about, and that is, in terms of the filming, Edward G. Robinson was apparently almost completely deaf at this time. And so he had to practice his lines with some visual cues. And even if you know that and you watch it, you can't tell that he's not literally responding back and forth with Charlton Heston or the people in the book exchange or anything else, which is, quite phenomenal. Of course, it was his last film. He was in 101 films and died right after this one was over.
Yeah, I was reading that he didn't tell anyone that he was dying. I mean, they could probably tell, yeah, he's a very old guy, but he knew that he was a couple of weeks. And yeah, you were right. The very last scene where he dies in the movie, that was his last on-screen moment. So it's very, very poignant. And he was famous for, he was in the 10 Commandments, and he was also famous for like gangster movies, right? Like Little Caesar might have been one of them. Like he's one of those guys that mimicked a lot. You'll see like characters like have that kind of wise guy kind of caricature voice, and that was his thing, right?
Like, yeah, I think you're right about that, Daniel. I remember he's the guy that was always like, yeah, see that guy.
Yeah, that guy. See,
get him, boys.
You dirty rat.
All right,
I'm pretty sure he was the bad guy in Key Largo with Humphrey Bogart.
I think you're right about that.
Okay, yeah, we're going to be doing a Humphrey Bogart movie pretty soon. We're going to be doing some Casablanca, not next week, but probably in a couple of months from now. But next week, we are going to have a kick-ass guest. It's Raylene Lightheart coming back on the show. She's from the Blast Off show with Johnny Rocket and Raylene Lightheart. And she's a kick-ass guest, so appropriately, we're doing the movie Kick-Ass.
Oh.
Which she said is really fun. I haven't seen it yet, but there's been 2 of them, so maybe I'll try to watch both. But it should be an interesting episode. She's always a great guest, and I look forward to that next week.
All right, another superhero film. I'm down.
Can't get enough of those. Well, Dennis, thank you so much for recommending this movie and the great discussion. And hopefully you can stick around for a little bit more of the bonus content right after we say goodnight from last night to everyone. This is episode 120 of the show, lastnighters.com/120. And we'll see you guys all next week for Kick-Ass with Raylene Lightheart. So I'll just repeat myself. Good night from last night.
Smooth.
All right, and we can continue.